All right, guys. Dane, Jonah Custom Guitars. Back on the 1964-ish Grammar guitar. I get a pretty extreme close-up there. And I have been drop filling. There was an area right here under this pick guard. The pick guard in question. They had made a full pick guard that went on both sides because there was some pretty extreme pick wear up by the neck, and I'm going to move this back a little bit. See if I can move it that far back. You can see right there at the top of the screen how that's worn really badly right in here. Anyway, so I've mentioned this before. The owner doesn't have a problem with natural wear, but with the damage in the finish from the pick guard, he wants to get rid of that as much as we can. So, long story short, I've been drop filling. That takes about a minute, but you got to get out in the shop, drop fill. You got to go do something else or work on something else in the shop. Come back a half an hour later, or an hour later, drop fill another. And that takes a second, and it's just this really tedious thing back and forth. So along with this damage, there were also some little scratches that were up underneath the pick guard that I'm trying to get out as well. I sand them a little bit, but I didn't want to go into the wood or into the color. So in that situation, I'm getting some reflective. If you mess with lacquer at all, anything that happens in previous coats will telegraph to the top, and you'll see. You're never going to get rid of it, but it might make it a little less obvious. You'll really have to be studying it, hopefully, to see it. Now, in this area that we're talking about here, the worst case scenario area, it's not rough, but every time you put a layer, and after I did all the drop fill, and also I drop filled the snot out of this thing in the last week. Snot is a technical term in this case. Anytime you do that, it actually just burns into the previous coat and sinks. And so every time you drop fill, it sinks. And so even when you think you've drop filled way above the surface, and even though you have, stuff around the fill will shrink in. So every time you sand it down, you end up with still a little sunken spot. And so that's what you fight with when you're doing this sort of thing. Then I went ahead and I shot some really dry layers. And dry just means you just back your gun way down close so that you just spit and dust basically. And because when you wet it up, no matter what happened before, it wets everything and it sinks. So you just kind of have to keep playing with it, and that's about the best way to describe it. So I went ahead and I just dry sanded all this white. Here you see it. I dry sanded with some 320, the golden stuff from 3M, and I'm moving to 400 wet and dry, which is what I've been using previously. And just so you know what the process has been, because I didn't film it all, I've been using this stuff, the lighter fluid or naphtha, here in California. Even in the great northern area of the state, they've outlawed naphtha as a solvent. They haven't outlawed it as a fuel. I'm not exactly sure I understand the difference, but far be it from me. So that's what I've been using. There are no holes in this guitar. There's no reason not to just use water on this, and the water stays wet longer as you're sanding. So I've moved on to just using some water with it, drop a dish soap in it, and 400 on a block, and that's what I'm going to do. Just going to start sanding this. I'll probably just do this a little while because it gets kind of dull watching somebody sand. So anyway, we're going to get some. Paper's been soaking in the water for a bit. I got quite a bit of lacquer shot on top of this area, right in the area we're messing with here. So I'm not concerned that I'm going to burn through doing this with 400. Not that I'm, not going to be careful, because there is always that possibility. Every time I dry things out or wipe my paper off or dunk it, I'll be looking for blue in the water or on the towel. because that'll be an indicator that I've gone through the clear and into the color. And that's where I stop, because I'm not going to get into the color on this. That's just nothing but problems. So when you do this a little while, and then you check and you see if you've made any progress. And what I'm checking for in this case is that I've gotten far enough in to where I have no shiny spots, so that whether it's orange peel from what I sprayed or if it's just divots in the top. Now, you're going to live with, you know, a few. That's just the bottom line here. On this guitar, we're not going to get it perfect. And quite honestly, there's no reason to get it perfect, because it's a 1964. If I got this one perfect spot on this guitar, it's going to look a little odd, with the rest of it being fairly imperfect. Part of the beauty of these things is that they get this far into life and they're still pretty stinking nice, but not perfect. And that's character. So, if you haven't watched any of the Gibson neck reset videos, actually I haven't posted any of these on this guitar, and I have posted the Gibsons. But if you get down the road and you see one of these and you haven't watched the reset on the Gibson, go ahead and catch up and watch that one. The reason I'm thinking of it right now is because it is a little tedious in places, because you're just kind of waiting for things to happen. But I wanted to get a real-time feel for what it takes to get something done. So it's like 90 minutes worth of video on getting the neck out of a 70 Gibson. Anyway, just keep doing this. When you're sanding wood, unfinished wood especially, you don't swirl, you don't do any kind of thing except just straight back and forth like this with the grain. However, when you're on top of a finish on lacquer, by the time you get to 400, swirling is just fine. Actually, you're less likely to see those scratch marks than straight marks. The problem with swirling on wood is that you get cross-grain scratches in the wood, and that you do see quite readily. You can hear it sounds fairly rough in places. That's because as I sprayed this one area, I pretty much got overspray on the rest of the top. And so that overspray will be buffed off, but when I first hit it with the paper, it just sounds really, really ragged. You know, I'm gonna wipe this off and see where I'm at. So this is a kind of point of discussion here, as if I get to a point here where I'm happy with where the top is, you know, the finish isn't shrunk back, I'll just do a couple more really light coats of lacquer, just in the area we're dealing with, and let it set for a week before I try to sand anything out. This has only been just yesterday overnight that I shot the last lacquer on this. You don't want to try to buff anything. Certainly get it leveled and let it set for, you know, I mean, if you're doing a whole instrument, you want to let it set for a good month, 4 weeks. However, I'm checking this thing from an angle here. However, when you're doing a touch-up like this, I'll probably just hand buff this area, and if I were taking it to a wheel, I might create too much heat. I still got over here, over in this area, where I had some scratches. I actually brushed some lacquer on there, and I'm seeing a few lines in that just from the lacquer. I'm not seeing the scratches that were over there, and I'm not seeing scratches up here either. I'm I'm seeing a few lines in the lacquer from having brushed up there as well. So, and I got a few little divots in here. I think by the time I'm finished wet sanding this and then retouching this area, I'll be ready to let it set. Now we talked about, I gotta grab some, talked about the original pickguard and how it was fit over the entire face of the guitar. Well, it wasn't the original, it was an aftermarket. So they pulled the original pickguard off and then made this pickguard, which was sort of a match. And it's way too, I'm gonna back this out a little bit or you're not gonna be able to tell what's going on here. Okay. So, the original pickguard, no, excuse me, the original pickguard, actually you can see a shadow on the top of the guitar. I'm not sure you can see it in the video, but it looked like this. And that's what the original pickguard looked like. And they, because of this wear up here by the neck, and I have no idea how anybody could beat a guitar that hard. Anyway, so they put that pickguard on in order to cover that up. They went all the way to the inside of the sound hole with this one. The original was out here at this white ring in the rosette, and I tried. I don't know if you can see that being written on, but I tried this parchment paper to trace with, and you know, on a dark line you'd be able to see and trace through it, but on the shadow line that I was tracing on this guitar, which is, it seems really evident when you're just looking at it, but as soon as you put something like that, I tried it with the parchment, I tried it with wax paper. I ended up finding some clear cellophane. Thought about saran, but it's just too flimsy, and the clear cellophane, which is what's on top here, I just laid it on because it doesn't stretch. So I was able to trace that, still fairly rough as far as the tracing is concerned. And so then I glued it down to this piece of melamine. It's actually 1/4 inch masonite with a melamine face on it. So anyway, glued it down to that and then cut it out and just hand sanded, my oscillating spindle sander, not hand sanding, but I'll probably still have to do some touch up with hand sanding. Getting this radius freehand on that spindle sander was quite tedious, but it's really close now. It's still got a little inconsistency, but I think I'm probably going to do is go ahead and transfer this onto the pickguard material and get that cut out, and then all I'm dealing with is a 25 thousandths thick piece of plastic that I can just take a razor to and as a scraper and just scrape the edges where need be to match that contour a little better. So that's what I'm going to be working on. Just wanted you to see where we were with the pickguard and what the process for that was. Excuse me. So I'm going to turn you off. I'm going to go back to a little more wet sand in here, and then I'll probably, like I said, I'm going to go ahead and shoot. I'm not going to shoot a wet coat because there again it'll sink on me, so it's seeming pretty good. I'm just going to go ahead and shoot probably several dry coats in the affected areas right in here, and then let it set for a week. Probably just put it back in the case and stick it in the house so it's not out here in the shop, at risk. Anyway, thanks for watching, folks. We'll talk to you next time. The Grammer 64 Grammer guitar. All right. Hey, do the subscribe and the like thing, share it with your friends, all that good stuff. Thanks again.